The Battle of Vienna, fought on the 11th and 12th of September 1683, stands as one of the most dramatic and consequential military engagements in the entire history of the world. It was the moment when the tide turned, when the seemingly unstoppable westward march of the Ottoman Empire finally broke against the walls of a single European city, and when the long, slow decline of one of history's greatest powers quietly began. To understand why this battle mattered so profoundly, we have to go back and understand what the Ottoman Empire actually was at this point in history, what it represented, and why all of Europe watched the fate of Vienna with absolute terror. For more than 2 centuries before 1683, the Ottoman Empire had been the most powerful political and military force in the known world. At its height, it stretched from the gates of Morocco in the west to the borders of Persia in the east, from the steppes of Ukraine in the north to the deserts of Arabia and the Horn of Africa in the south. Its armies were disciplined, innovative, and battle-hardened. Its navy dominated the Mediterranean. Its administrative system was sophisticated enough to govern dozens of different peoples, languages, and religions simultaneously. The sultans in Constantinople commanded resources and manpower that no European monarch could match individually, and European rulers knew it. The Ottoman advance into Europe had been going on since the 14th century. They had taken the Balkans, crushed the Serbian kingdom at Kosovo, absorbed Bulgaria, and then in 1453 they had done the unthinkable. They had stormed and taken Constantinople itself, the ancient capital of the Eastern Roman Empire, ending over 1,000 years of Byzantine civilization in a single afternoon. The psychological shockwave of that event reverberated across Europe for generations. After Constantinople, the Ottomans pressed further. They took Greece, pushed through Hungary after the catastrophic Battle of Mohacs in 1526, and by the middle of the 16th century they had already appeared once before the walls of Vienna, in 1529, under the great Suleiman the Magnificent. That first siege had failed due to logistical overextension and early winter, but the message was unmistakable. The Ottomans were coming, and sooner or later they intended to make Vienna theirs. Vienna was not merely a city. It was the capital of the Habsburg Empire, the heart of Central European power, and the gateway to the rest of the continent. If Vienna fell, there was no obvious line of defense between the Ottomans and the cities of Germany, Italy, and France. The fall of Vienna would have fundamentally restructured the political and cultural map of Europe in ways that are almost impossible to fully calculate. By 1683, the Ottoman Empire was under the rule of Sultan Mehmed IV, but real power lay with his Grand Vizier, a man named Kara Mustafa Pasha. Kara Mustafa was ambitious, aggressive, and hungry for the kind of glory that only a spectacular conquest could provide. He had already been expanding Ottoman influence northward into Poland and eastward into Ukraine, but his great dream was Vienna. He convinced the Sultan to authorize a massive western campaign. In the spring of 1683, he assembled one of the largest armies the Ottomans had ever put into the field. Estimates range from 90,000 to as many as 150,000 men, along with an enormous artillery train, thousands of camels, and supply wagons, and a vast logistical apparatus that stretched back hundreds of miles into Ottoman territory. This was not a raid. This was not a probing attack. This was a campaign of conquest, and everyone on both sides understood exactly what was at stake. The Ottoman army moved with terrifying speed and efficiency through the Balkans and into Habsburg territory. The Habsburg Emperor, Leopold I, was not a man of particularly strong personal courage, and as the Ottoman host approached, he made the pragmatic, if undignified, decision to flee Vienna with his court, leaving the city's defense in the hands of Count Ernst Rudiger von Starhemberg, a tough and capable soldier who understood that he was being asked to hold an impossible position for as long as humanly possible. Starhemberg had perhaps 15,000 soldiers and armed civilians to defend a city whose walls were old, whose supplies were limited, and whose population was already gripped by panic. Many civilians had already fled into the countryside. Those who remained knew that if the walls broke before help arrived, there would be no mercy. The Ottoman siege began in July of 1683, And from the very first days, it was a masterclass in the kind of methodical, engineering-based warfare at which Ottoman military planners excelled. Rather than simply throwing men at the walls, Mustafa ordered his engineers to dig an elaborate network of approach trenches that zigzagged toward the fortifications, protecting the advancing soldiers from defensive fire. Behind these trenches, Ottoman sappers, specialized tunnel-digging soldiers, began burrowing beneath the walls themselves, packing the tunnels with gunpowder and then detonating them to collapse the masonry above. This technique, called mining, was one of the most effective and feared methods of siege warfare in the early modern period, and the Ottomans were exceptionally good at it. Week after week, section by section, the walls of Vienna were being eaten away from below. The defenders did everything they could. They dug counter-tunnels. They lit fires at the tunnel entrances to suffocate the sappers. They made desperate sorties out through the gates to destroy the Ottoman trenches. But they were too few and too exhausted to stop the process entirely. By early September, after nearly 2 months of continuous siege, large sections of the wall had been destroyed. The garrison was riddled with disease and hunger. Ammunition was running desperately low, and Starhemberg himself had been wounded. The city was sending desperate signal fires into the night sky, begging for relief. Vienna had perhaps a few days left at most. What happened next is one of the great stories of military coalition building in European history. Pope Innocent XI had been working for years to assemble what he called a Holy League, a unified Christian military response to the Ottoman threat. He had money, he had moral authority, and he had the ability to reach across the political rivalries and religious suspicions that normally kept European powers at each other's throats. The key figure he secured was John III Sobieski, the king of Poland-Lithuania. Sobieski was arguably the finest military commander in Europe at that moment, a man who had already made his reputation fighting Ottomans and Cossacks on the eastern frontiers of Poland. He was also brave to the point of recklessness and possessed of a grandiose self-image that made the idea of riding to the rescue of Christendom enormously appealing to him personally. He signed a mutual defense treaty with the Habsburgs and began assembling his forces, marching south through the late summer heat with a Polish-Lithuanian army, while Imperial German forces under Charles of Lorraine gathered from the west. The combined relief army that eventually assembled in the hills above Vienna numbered somewhere between 70 and 80,000 men, smaller than the Ottoman force, but composed of highly motivated, well-equipped soldiers who understood exactly what defeat would mean.